So, I'd like to start this morning with a reading that is actually typically done during a spring service, but metaphorically it seems appropriate and in line with the talk that I've got today. So let me just read this. It's called, O Spirit of Life and Renewal. We have wintered enough, mourned enough, oppressed ourselves enough. Our souls are too long cold and buried, our dreams all but forgotten, our hopes unheard. We're waiting to rise from the dead. In this, the season of steady rebirth, we awaken to the power so abundant, so holy, that returns each year through earth and sky. We will find our hearts again and our good spirits. We will love and believe and give and wonder and feel again the eternal powers. The flow of life moves ever onward through one faithful spring and another and now another. May we be forever grateful. Hallelujah. Amen. So as Barry mentioned, I have been doing a 4-part presentation based on this book, some ideas in this book by Richard Rohr. It's called Breathing Underwater, and it's spirituality and the 12 steps. As Barry said when he introduced me, I do work at Cumberland Heights Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center as one of the 2 spiritual directors there. And I am so profoundly grateful to be able to be in an environment where my work is about helping people discern the difference between a spiritual life and a religious life. And books like this are instrumental in my understanding of how to talk to people, but also in my own life, how to apply certain ideas. And one of the things that Richard Rohr says in his book here is that there are 4 spiritual truths, and if we start there, they can be transformative. And I'm just going to review because I've done 2 already, and this will be the 3rd today. The first spiritual truth is that we need to suffer to heal. And most of these seem counterintuitive and paradoxical. But I have to suffer to heal, because otherwise things are just going along great, or I think they are. And until I stumble, or until I run into the wall, and I just cannot keep going, most of us aren't inclined to do any sort of self-reflection or develop any kind of willingness to become teachable, to learn how to be different in whatever situation we're in. So it's like a friend of mine said, he never changes anything until he has no other options. He paints himself into a corner and then decides it's time to do something. So we usually have to suffer before we begin to heal. The second spiritual truth is that we need to surrender to win. In other words, if I've gotten to the place where I've suffered enough, then I need to quit fighting and doing it the way I've always done it. And surrender for us, all of us that grew up watching John Wayne and all those movies, we know that surrender is something we don't do, particularly as Americans, particularly as male Americans. But in our culture, surrender is synonymous with losing. And a helpful definition can be surrender, and surrendering just means quit fighting the way you've always done things. And it's incredibly freeing when I step back and, I step back and I hit this wall, take some steps back, and I hit the wall, and I take some steps back and I hit the wall. Oh my God, my head's starting to hurt because I'm hitting the wall, and I keep hitting the wall, and until I surrender and stop and think maybe there's a different way. Until I do that, there's no relief in sight. I'm going to continue doing what I've always done. So when I quit fighting and stop, is where the potential for change opens up for me. Which leads to this next spiritual truth that I'd like to explore today, which is we have to die in order to live. Now, obviously not physically. But I have to be willing in that moment of teachability to embrace a different way. And to do that means I need to let go of the way I view things, think about them, and act on them. And it seems to be a fairly common message in most spiritual thought over history. When you think about rebirth and being reborn in the Christian tradition, people are baptized and they lose that old way and they are reborn as a new person. Jesus talked about it all the time. You hear references to the children. We must become more childlike if we're to understand what he was trying to teach. When you think about Buddhism and you think about that need to let the self go so that we become more connected to that which is transcendent. It's about letting go of who I am and who I think I am and getting rid of all of that so that I can become open to something bigger than me. Taoism is the same way. There's a way in which we align ourselves. And when we do that, we kind of line ourselves up. They don't use this language, but we align ourselves and step into a zone of grace, if you will. I know that's a loaded word too. But a zone of life is simpler, life is more beautiful, life is fuller. So we have to die in order to live. And essentially what Richard Rohr is talking about here is this need to recognize how much our ego drives everything about our experience. This idea of all of my judgments about you and about myself and my expectations in the way I think things ought to be, my striving, my comparisons. They have more than I do, I'll work harder and I'll get it. And I start striving and manipulating and doing what I need to do. All of that stuff, that ego-driven way of being in the world, is what can cause us great pain. Now, we need ego strength to protect ourselves. We need to be able to set boundaries. But what he's talking about is this false self that we create from the very beginning of our lives. And we need to become more childlike if we're to experience spiritual transformation. Why is that? Why is it important? Because that ego-driven, judgmental, striving, comparing, self-consciousness that never quite satisfied. There's always more. If there's going to be happiness, it's out there and I can get there. All of that is where the false self resides. That construct many of us created to navigate the families we grew up in. It's where our people-pleasing tendencies come from. Our need to fit in and be part of in an unhealthy way. We develop these constructs in our families, but also have them imposed on us by school and coaches and scoutmasters and people at the church and all these things that begin to be piled on to us. And as long as we sustain that false self, the one that's never satisfied, happiness, contentment, being able to be in the present moment is very elusive. And I think most painful, we remain separate from others and the divine. So I may have asked this question before, but you've been to a wedding reception. You've been to the wedding, you go to the wedding reception, there's food there, the music is playing, but people are still arriving, right? The bride and groom are still off somewhere getting the pictures taken, so you're always kind of waiting around for them. But it's the wedding reception, and people are starting to pour in, and the music comes on, and who are the first people on the dance floor?
Kids.
Yeah, not the drunks. They're second. They're second. Usually, it's the children. The children unself-consciously go out and start moving to the music. They don't care what they look like. They don't care if they've got the groove. They just go out and move with the music. So they are essentially unself-conscious. It's like they're pre-false self. They're in the moment and responding to the world around them in the most natural and honest way. And I think that's what Richard Rohr is commenting on when he talks about our need to die to live. I need to let go of all of that self-consciousness and slough off all those false things for me to be fully present and enjoy my life. Now, if you've ever read the Gnostic Gospels of Thomas, are y'all familiar with them? It's fascinating because it's like someone just said, oh yeah, and then Jesus said this, and then Jesus said this, and Jesus said this. There's no real narrative. It's like someone just wanted to capture everything that was being said. And I'm not going to quote this exactly because it's kind of cryptic. But one of the sayings is, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, you will live. However, if you do not bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will surely kill you. There are probably different interpretations of it. My understanding is we each have a true self. We each have this thing within us that is unique and divinely connected. And we need to bring it forth into the world. We need to manifest it. And if we don't, we know it. Somehow deep in our marrow, we know we are not living into our full and natural and beautiful selves. So if we don't bring that forward, it slowly, over time, just takes the life out of us. I'm going to ask you guys to indulge me just a little bit because this is an important part of his introduction here. Because one of the points that Richard Rohr makes is that 12-step spirituality and this 12-step recovery movement has actually done more to awaken spirits than many of the organized religions, because it isn't religious in impulse, it's spiritual. But he starts off by saying this, and I'll just kind of give you a little history, that in the very early days of AA, when they were seeing the promise of what was happening, some psychologists got together and started interviewing people that had been in recovery for a little while to see, what made them successful. How were they doing this? And I'm just going to read this. He says, when AA was quite young, a number of eminent psychologists and doctors made an exhaustive study of a good-sized group of so-called problem drinkers. They finally came up with a conclusion that shocked AA members at the time. They concluded these distinguished men had the nerve to say that most of the alcoholics under investigation were still childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. And then Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, writes this: how we alcoholics did resent that verdict. We would not believe that our adult dreams were often truly childish. And considering the rough deal life had given us, we felt it perfectly natural to be sensitive. As to our grandiose behavior, we insisted that we had been possessed of nothing but a high and legitimate ambition to win the battle of life. And Richard Rohr takes that little segment that's actually found in the big book of AA and says, it is my experience over 40 years as a priest that we could say the same about many well-intentioned Christians and clergy. Their religion has never touched them or heal them at the unconscious level where all the real motivation, hurts, unforgiveness, anger, wounds, and illusions are stored, hiding. And often fully operative. They never went to the inner room where Jesus invited us and where things hid secretly. He says Christians are usually sincere and well-intentioned people until you get to any real issues of ego, control, power, money, pleasure, and security. Then they tend to be pretty much like everybody else. And I think we could say you are usually sincere and well-intentioned people until you get into any real issues of ego, control, power, money. He says they tend to be pretty much like everybody else. We often, and this is him talking about his priesthood, we often gave them a bogus version of the gospel, some fast food religion without any deep transformation of the self. And the result has been the spiritual disaster of Christian countries that tend to be as consumer-oriented, proud, warlike, racist, class-conscious, and addicted as everybody else, and often more so, I'm afraid. It is our culture, I think. It's not an indictment of the Christians. It's an indictment of our high-mindedness, our fast food religion, and in so many ways our fast food patriotism and nationalism. This is about internal, personal transformation. If we don't go through that process, we're just talking. And these are high-minded ideals that aren't transforming anyone. So, we have to suffer to heal. We have to get to a point where we've had enough pain to do something about it. Then we need to say, I'm going to quit fighting. There is a different and better way. There must be. So we surrender to it. And then we must die to the old way of being and embrace the new life. We must grow through that internal transformation because that is where the healing occurs. This is where we begin to slough off all the crud and layers of falseness until we reconnect and reclaim our true selves. The third spiritual truth is where we are rewarded for recognizing and embracing the first two. I'm hurting. There must be a different way. And now I'm going to embrace something new. But I have to get out of my own way. We have suffered enough. We are beaten up enough. But it's really important, I think, to recognize that this is a cycle. Because just as soon as I realize I've suffered, and just as soon as I surrender, and just as soon as I try something new and I slough off an old way and things are going well for a while, oh my goodness, here I go again. So we never, ever really reach this point. It just requires an openness to recognize that we have this. If we are truly to live full, vibrant lives, that we're going to be going through this cycle all the time. It is a cycle. We never arrive. We get comfortable and we heal until we get uncomfortable again. And we hope with age and experience we begin to recognize, oh yeah, I remember this and I know what to do now. We die to live. We identify and continue to outgrow the false self. And in the process, we learn how to dance without worrying what other people think.